The last learning objective for this particular video is to compare and contrast between a scientific theory and a scientific law. So I'm going to start here with the comparison because I think it's very important to kind of compare these two. And a lot of people kind of confuse these. So a lot of students really confuse these. But the comparison is that both require a ton of evidence. When we're looking at a scientific theory, even though it says a theory, and we think of a theory as something like, oh, well, it's just a guess, it's not really true. If we're talking about a scientific theory, that's not the case because it is backed up by a ton of evidence. So both a scientific theory and a scientific law must have a ton of evidence to back them up. The second thing that I would say about the comparison is that they both of them, okay, are constantly being tested. They're constantly being tested. Okay, so they're constantly being tested. They're constantly being evaluated. We're getting more and more data on them. It's not that they're stagnant and they're set in stone. A lot of people think, well, you have a hypothesis and that goes to a theory and that goes to a law, and that's not necessarily true. A lot of times you can either have the scientific law before the theory, or you can have the theory before the law. It doesn't really matter, but both of those are kind of encompassed in the same type of thing. But one thing about the scientific theory that's a little bit different than the scientific law is that the scientific theory is going to explain. This is a big word for this. Explain. So this guy explains. Okay, so this explains in detail how and why a scientific phenomenon occurs. Or occurred if it's past tense. Okay. So if we have a scientific phenomenon, a theory is going to explain why this happened. Okay. And then the scientific law predicts. So the scientific law is going to predict. So this is the big word for scientific law. So it's going to predict what will happen. So I like to say, like, if you've got the kinetic molecular theory, which is a theory about gases, we get a ton of laws from this theory. This theory explains the properties of gases. It explains why gases have pressure. It explains a whole bunch of different things. But you can also have this, you also have like the ideal, like, gas law. So like an example of a scientific law would be the ideal gas law. Now, this law is explained by the kinetic molecular theory. Okay, or as I like to abbreviate, the KM2. So I really like to talk about how, like, you really have scientific theories that encompass all the laws. So I really like to do that. So we have scientific law on the inside. And then we have the theory that wraps around that scientific law. So it really encompasses that law. And like I said, the ideal gas law is a part of the kinetic molecular theory. It predicts what happens to variables within a gas, but it is encompassed and explained by the kinetic molecular theory. So, okay, so the scientific theory is kind of this all-encompassing thing, and when we talk about scientific theories, we're talking about something that's probably pretty much set in stone. So that is all for this video. I hope you have a wonderful night.